Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. WBUR senior business reporter Zeninjor Enwemeka. Welcome back.
Hey, Daryl. Good to be here.
Yes. It's been a little while.
Yes, it has.
Zeninjor, you got a story that's pretty straightforward here. More people in the region are buying electric vehicles. We also call them EVs. But the rate of adoption here still lags behind similar metro areas, and the growth is not fast enough to help hit the state's emission goals. So, Zeninjor, lay that out for us. Give us an overview of just how many people are buying EVs here in the region and how it compares to other places in the country.
Yeah, so EVs have grown steadily in the region over the last few years. So since 2019, electric vehicles have more than quadrupled on our region's roadways. So that's a good thing. So back in 2019, there was just under 5,000 electric vehicles. And as of last year, there are more than 21,000 in Greater Boston. So that is significant growth. It's steady growth. But despite that, Greater Boston lags behind other major metro areas when it comes to making this shift to electric vehicles. So in looking at the top 25 metros in the U.S., Greater Boston ranks 15th out of the top 25 metros. So just 8% of new vehicle registrations are for fully electric vehicles in our region. Now, compare that to the San Francisco area, for example. San Francisco area ranks first, and there almost 35% of vehicles are electric. So huge difference.
Yeah. What does that mean for the state's climate goals?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, of course, with any set of data, you can look at it a number of ways. So thinking about how do we compare to other metro areas, we have a ways to go to catch up, and there's some different reasons for that. But in terms of, looking just within our region and within our state, I should note on a state level, Massachusetts exceeds the national share of electric vehicles. So statewide, just over 12% of vehicles sold in the state were electric in 2023, which is more than the national figure of roughly 8%. Really what this data tells us, it shows us how uneven electric vehicles are across the country. Focusing specifically on where we're at in Massachusetts, in terms of climate goals, transportation is super critical. It's the largest source of emissions, and most of those emissions come from vehicles. So the state wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. That is the overall climate goal in Massachusetts. And the transition away from gas-powered cars is a really big part of that. So the state has hit some of its targets, but it still has more work to do in other areas. In terms of the number of EVs on the road, the state has actually surpassed its goals in recent years, and that continues to grow in terms of more and more vehicles are coming onto the state's roadways that are fully electric. But when you think about, for example, charging infrastructure, that remains a challenge. And the state has some specific goals there. It's making headway, but still has quite a ways to go when it comes to charging infrastructure, which is so critical. If we want people to move towards electric vehicles, they got to have places to charge them.
Right. And that sounds like a primary challenge here is the infrastructure for electric vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest challenges. On a practical level, someone who's thinking about switching to an electric vehicle, that's going to be, one of the big questions you have is, well, where can I charge it? Would I be able to make a long trip and not run into trouble and have the infrastructure along the way? The state wants to have 15,000 public chargers available by 2025. But right now, there's just over 7,600 available. So we're a little more than halfway there for that target date, which is just next year, so pretty soon here. By 2030, the state is supposed to have 75,000 public chargers. So we have a ways to go. The chargers are coming. The Department of Public Utilities, for example, has a plan to install tens of thousands of chargers over the next few years. The state is installing chargers in state facilities and also working with cities and towns to do the same. And also MassDOT is working on putting those high-speed chargers along highways and key corridors. So it's in progress, but still has a long way to go.
Understood. Okay, Zen and Jor, I want to take a break. But when we get back, let's talk about what the state needs to do to help get more EVs on the roads here in Massachusetts. So we'll be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we're back with WBUR senior business reporter Zen Jor and Wemeka. So, Zen Jor, the state wants more people to drive EVs as part of its climate goals. What are they doing to incentivize buyers and manufacturers in the region?
So the state's doing a few things. The state offers rebates to help buyers offset the cost of an EV. Now, this is something, experts agree that EVs are cheaper to maintain in the long run, but the upfront costs are higher and are really a significant barrier. I spoke to Catherine Antos about this. She's the Undersecretary of Decarbonization and Resilience at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
An electric vehicle is cheaper to operate and maintain. At this point in time, it does cost more upfront. And so these rebates can close that gap.
So the state has the rebates in place. There are also federal tax credits available. And really, the idea there is to help give people some financial cushion to be able to make that switch to electric vehicles. There are still some limitations here, though. An expert I spoke to said, overall prices still do need to come down when it comes to electric vehicles in order to get even more people to make that switch. And that's largely going to depend on manufacturers because it's still very expensive for many manufacturers to produce electric vehicles. So there's that issue. And then there's also just a lack of variety among electric vehicle models from car makers. So if you have specific vehicle needs, maybe you have a family or certain household needs, whether it's a minivan or truck or certain type of vehicle that you really need, there are more limited options. But that's changing. There are more models coming onto the market. So that could possibly also give people more price points to shop from. And Massachusetts has also adopted California's clean car standards just last year. So that requires manufacturers to sell more electric vehicles over time. So by 2035, all new vehicles sold in the state must be electric. Here's Catherine Antos again.
There is nothing unique about Massachusetts that is going to make it harder to own an electric vehicle here. we have the rebates. We're sending the signal to manufacturers that they are required to sell an increasing portion of electric vehicles here in the state.
Yeah, so as Catherine Antos mentioned, this is, there are a number of things underway that the state has put in place to really help encourage that switch to electric vehicles. A long way to go. There has been progress made, but, it's something that the state is pushing forward on, and we'll have to wait to see, how the growth really increases in the coming years.
Right. Well, part of that growth is the infrastructure. I want to drill down there and ask about the accessibility of this infrastructure, people's access to chargers in different communities across the state. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and accessibility is a concern. For context, public charging infrastructure is critical because a third of Massachusetts residents lack off-street parking and face barriers to charging. Also, when you think about places like Boston, other urban areas, other cities, many people live in apartments or multifamily units, and they can't install personal chargers. Experts say that disproportionately impacts people of color and low-income households. So that is why there is this critical need for public chargers. And there's a need for equitable distribution of public chargers. We've had past reporting in Boston that found that most of the public chargers in the city were concentrated downtown or neighborhoods close to downtown, and other areas further away from downtown just didn't have as much charging infrastructure. So the city has goals in place to improve that. On the state level, the state is working to roll out more chargers. But this accessibility and equity issue is definitely something that we'll need to keep an eye on moving forward as all of this is underway in terms of getting more infrastructure out, getting more public chargers out. As the state is trying to reach these broader climate goals and these broader goals of moving people to electric vehicles, it's important to make sure that there is accessibility for all parts of the population, for various neighborhoods to actually be able to make that switch to EVs.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to the state's climate goals as well. Just how big of a part of the state's climate goals is making the switch to EVs?
Well, transportation is critical. So It's the largest source of emissions, and most of those emissions come from vehicles. So overall, the state wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. So the transition away from gas-powered cars is a big part of that.
Because I'm thinking about public transportation. I'm thinking about our buses, our trains, other modes of transportation that people can take instead of a car. Is the state also thinking about things they can do just to get people to move away from cars altogether?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And that is also a part of what the state is trying to do, or at least trying to encourage as well. They want people to take public transportation, to bike or walk. So in terms of public transportation, improving the MBTA, increasing ridership there is also very important. Of course, we both know the T has a lot of challenges in that regard, but it is something that the state is thinking about in terms of its climate goals. The state knows that public transit and other modes of transportation are really, really important options for people. And really, it's the idea, can we get people encouraged, push, or help facilitate whether it's public transit or even looking at housing initiatives of building more housing in places where people can walk to where they need to go or bike to where they need to go. How can the state help push those initiatives and efforts forward to give people other options? Because really, if people need a car, then the hope is that they choose electric vehicles. Otherwise, it's really necessary for people to have good, reliable alternatives to vehicles.
Got it. Lieutenant Jordan, thank you for this story and taking the time to talk with us here at The Common. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. if you like what you're hearing, please head to wherever you listen to podcasts, especially Apple or Spotify. Rate and review us. Let us know how you're liking the show. Please, 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 please. And thank you to everybody who's already done it. And with that, I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I will talk to you tomorrow.